This is a webinar we are calling Radical Love, where we at Save the Sound and Creative Climate Code explore the intersections of social and environmental justice in action. I am one of your speakers tonight. I'm Alex Rodriguez, and I work with Save the Sound as an environmental justice specialist. I've been community organizing for nearly a decade, and some of the major focuses my program at Save the Sound focuses on is community engagement, policy advocacy, and storytelling. And we felt it very important to dive into these intersections tonight, as it is very prevalent to the times we are overcoming. Save the Sound as an organization, we lead environmental action in the Long Island Sound region. We fight climate change, we save endangered lands, we protect the Sound and its rivers and ecosystems, and we are proud of it. Our work ranges from, as implied in our name, Connecticut, and into coastal New York, with some areas of Westchester and Long Island included in our advocacy. And this is a snapshot of some of our work in the region. This is a snapshot from what is our impact map. If you go to savethesound.org, you'll be able to pull up this map here, where you find icons identifying many projects in the region. The areas in pink are climate-related projects. Areas in green are more ecological restoration related projects. Areas in blue are water quality monitoring projects. Some areas in yellow are legal related projects. And we share this with you to just give you an example of how far reaching our operations are. And with your support, we can continue this advocacy and legal and scientific expertise that we bring to many different platforms. And I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight. Catherine Cat Morris is a climate change maker. She is the host of Radical Love Sounds. It is a talk I'm sorry, a talk show. Yes.
Podcast.
Yep. And Kat leads Creative Climate Co. as its lead consultant. She is a two-time Husky, UConn Husky, with her Master's of Public Policy and her Bachelor's in Anthropology and Cognitive Science. At UConn, Kat founded UConn Collaborative Organizing to promote solidarity and intersectionality in social and environmental justice movements. Kat starred in a TEDx called How to Collaborate for Environmental Justice, in a call to action, really calling out environmental racism and health inequities, and how to meaningfully engage your community using radical love and intersectionality. And a couple of years ago, Kat had hosted Seaside Sounds for Environmental Justice in Bridgeport, and it was a cultural festival meant to bring together advocates and activists from all walks of life, and really draw attention to Little Liberia, which was the origins of a predominantly Black neighborhood within Bridgeport. And I'm going to turn it over to Kat to kick us off into this Radical Love webinar. Kat, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate the invitation from Save the Sounds to be here, and everyone who is here with us spending their Thursday evening. It's Friday Junior, so I know you could be doing a lot of different things right now, but I'm really grateful to have your ears and your eyes. So let's get into what environmental justice is. And we're going to do this while incorporating a bit of Black history since it's still February. All right. So environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of their race, ethnicity, their nationality, or income, etc. With respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. That's crucial because so much of the different abuses are happening and that we're still dealing with now with like disproportionate sightings, etc., happen very easily because the community members that are now facing them were not allowed at the table when those decisions were being made. So much of environmental justice is rectifying that first and foremost with participation and access to necessary knowledge. Of course, this then must be followed up with by fair treatment, meaning so no groups should be bearing that disproportionate share of negative environmental consequences resulting from different types of industries or government policies. And meaningful participation, which starts with sessions like this, or engaging in various forms of climate education, allows people to have the opportunity to participate in decision-making activities to prevent their health and community well-being from being harmed. It allows the public to influence regulatory agency decisions like DEEP, like the DOT. It allows for communities to raise their voice with respect to the concerns that they have on these decision-making processes. And it makes sure that decision makers are accountable to facilitating this level of involvement in a way that isn't just, we're crossing a box. It's like, are you making it accessible to people from different language barriers? Are you making it accessible to people who are working during the day or might have a physical disability that would make entering your premises a challenge, right? So it's making sure that you're being inclusive and cognizant at every level of involvement. Next slide, please. So throughout the presentation, we're going to kind of go back and forth between environmental justice and environmental racism. So this graphic is kind of just disambiguating the two, although they, of course, are connected phenomenon. Environmental justice, which is what we want, is, a movement that was born in response to environmental racism, right? Like it is supposed to be its opposite. It's the solution to it. It's seeking fair distribution of environmental benefits, and it is really about, again, equal access and fair participation in the decision-making processes, whereas environmental racism, which is largely what we've been experiencing and unfortunately still are experiencing, refers to like the systemic and disproportionate impact of environmental hazards and like polluting industries, different types of hazardous waste, air pollution, etc., in communities of color, predominantly low-income communities and predominantly in Connecticut, Black and Hispanic communities. It's also, to relax rules about when we're enforcing zoning rules and when we're enforcing different levels of environmental protection. So we're moving away from that in order to increase, health equity and make sure that our environment and the people and animals who are living in it have access to a healthy life. Next slide, please. So what started this movement? Because as we know, it is in response to injustices that were going on for decades, if not really, honestly, centuries. So in 1982, a small, predominantly Black community in North Carolina, Warren County, was selected for a site to host a hazardous landfill. Remember that when we get to Hartford. But the NAACP staged a big protest where more than 500 people showed up and were arrested, including Dr. Benjamin Chavez from UCC. This, however, did not stop the landfill, but it did start the movement. And this is a type of community action that led to the research that has been foundational to the work that we do now, namely the United Church of Christ study on toxic waste and race, as referenced in 2021, but also there's research back in the 70s, which found that the most significant factor in siting of waste facilities was race, right? So if it's like, if you see a source of a waste facility, odds are you're going to be in a Black community. Next slide, please. So kind of as we're thinking about the birth of this movement, I do want to highlight, also in honor of Black History Month, the mother and father of environmental justice. Quick show of hands. Has anyone heard of Hazel M. Johnson or Dr. Robert Bullard? Yep, okay. I'll pretend everyone with their cameras off has their hand raised. Okay, beautiful. So y'all are ahead of the curve. But I want to give a little bit more context, especially because, you know, me, I've been doing this work since I was in high school. However, I just learned about Hazel M. Johnson last year. And so this is kind of the necessity to share these stories, especially in moments like this. So Mama EJ was born in Cancer Alley, New Orleans. She then moved to Chicago during her childhood and lived there for the remainder of her life. She connected with, you know, the environmental justice movement through researching the health impacts that were happening in her community after her otherwise completely healthy husband died at the age of 41 with lung cancer, never smoked a day in his life, was not exposed to anything besides the polluting industries in the area. Once that kind of spiraled into her working on different forms of housing issues, she started learning about more people in her community that were also dying of cancer, women who were miscarrying or their children were being born with birth defects. So in response to kind of the everyday work that she wanted to do, which eventually transformed into primarily environmental justice work, she founded the People for Community Recovery to support those of the alt-jed, I don't know how to say it, Altridge Gardens neighborhood. And they really shifted their focus into reducing environmental hazards. If you've heard the term toxic donut, she coined that term. She made numerous environmental victories for their residents, including extending water and sewage services, establishing a new health clinic, removing asbestos and PCB, abating lead, and eventually creating a moratorium on new or expanded landfills in Chicago. In the mid 1980s, she helped a young Barack Obama well before we knew his name, who was just wetting his feet in community organizing. This then helped her continue to gain traction with residents and continue to fight for their rights. At the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. in 1991, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, she was a featured speaker. So that's how long she's been in this movement. In 1994, she was invited to witness the signing of Executive Order 12898 by President Johnson, the Executive Order federal actions to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. 2 years later, President Clinton honored her and her organization as one of the country's top 100 environmental justice groups. She continued her work until her unfortunate death in 2011, which was the result of congenital heart failure. In 2021, she was awarded a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom. So flowers to Hazel M. Johnson. Dr. Robert Bullard, who I think has a lot more mainstream notoriety or recognition rather, is currently a professor of Urban Planning and Environmental Policy and the director of the Bullard Center of Environmental and Climate Justice. Prior to working at this university, he founded the Environmental Justice Resource Center at Clark Atlanta University. He's an award-winning author of 18 plus books that address sustainable development, environmental racism, urban land use, industrial facility sightings, community reinvestment, transportation, climate justice, all of the above, surrounding environmental justice and resilience and climate action. He's a co-founder of the HBCU, as of Historically Black Colleges and Universities Climate Change Consortium. His latest books include Race, Place, and Environmental Justice After Hurricane Katrina. In 2013, he was honored with the Sierra Club John Muir Award. He was the first African-American to win this award. In 2014, the Sierra Club also named the Environmental Justice Award in his honor. In 2017, he was awarded the Children Health Advocate Award by the Children's Environmental Health Network of the country. And in 2018, the Global Climate Action Summit named him one of the top 22 global climate trailblazers. He's won so many awards, like honestly, I can go on for the remainder of our time tonight, but he is alive and well and still doing the research and advocacy necessary at the local and national level, including serving on the White House Environmental Justice Advocacy Council, which I'm not sure still exists as of January 21st, but let's keep it going. Beautiful. So as I mentioned before, Hazel M. Johnson was a speaker at the at the National People of Color Environmental Summit. Some of the principles that they landed on to become foundational to the work and really the essence of environmental justice moving forward was one, that the sacredness of Mother Earth and all life must be free from environmental destruction. Two, that public policy be based on mutual respect and justice for everyone. And I like to emphasize every species as well. For ethical balance and responsible uses of land, for universal protection from nuclear testing and toxic waste, and for the right of self-determination. There are many more. We can share that with folks who request the slides. Next slide. Oh, perfect. So zooming back into Connecticut, I'm sure many people here are familiar with the environmental racism issues that have been going on in Hartford. So we have the Mura plant, which was the Materials Innovation and Recycling Authority, which incinerated trash from dozens upon dozens of towns in Connecticut. Advocates often spoke out against the fact that there were toxic pollutants being released into the air, land, and water that were causing, they had maladaptive impacts on community health. And this really it remains a prime example of environmental racism in Connecticut that many people in Connecticut have been introduced to the topic through. Thankfully, through the work of people that have been here and advocating before we were born, likely, that plant, the Mira plant, was taken down, thus facilitating a cleaner, more equitable future for community members moving forward. It was a decades-long fight, I want to emphasize, but a win nonetheless. Next slide. Since this is Save the Sound and we're based both in Connecticut and New York, we want to highlight the fact that, nearly half of New York City faces environmental injustices. And it's historic, it's not new, right? Since the 1950s, predominantly Black communities that were thriving at the time, like Seneca Village, have been harmed by predatory processes, industrialization, and health impediments as a result of those. Seneca Village is pretty well known for being a very prosperous Black community that essentially was seized through eminent domain in order to build what we now enjoy as Central Park, right? And so it is a bit of a, it's kind of hard to reconcile those two things because we love Central Park and we need more nature-based options, especially in cities, but it should not be at the expense of communities. And of course, it was a predominantly Black community. Next slide, please. So what type of environmental justice work is going on in Connecticut? Shout out to Alex, who's right there. Back in, the late 90s, 1998, when I was born, the Connecticut Coalition for Economic and Environmental Justice, then known as the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice, was formed by Dr. Mark Mitchell, a climate change, energy, and environmental health expert. He is also a great guy, and if you do anything in Connecticut related to environmental justice, he will probably be in the room. So, longtime AJ advocate who's pictured next to Alex in the photo to the right. Sharon Lewis leads CCEG in organizing to improve urban environmental health through educating communities, promoting changes in governmental policy, and through promoting individual, corporate, and governmental responsibility towards our environment. Her organization collaborates with organizations like the New Haven Environmental Justice Network and many others have led crucial fights against traffic idling, the shutdown of the English station, and against other human health hazards. On that topic, seeing Sharon, it reminds me of the fact that, despite all the work that she did for the community, a couple of years back, she suffered from a really devastating combined sewage overflow that essentially happened based on the negligence of the city of Hartford, and it rendered her home inhospitable for several months and at an expense that she had to bear herself, which reminds me to go back to the last slide to talk about something very similar happening in New York. We can just run backwards. Yeah, perfect. So I forgot to mention that very recently, Save the Sound has been recognized for very active in raising the voices of members of the Westchester County, since they too have been experiencing sewage overflows. However, it was into the Hutchinson River, and similar to as it was in Hartford, the complaints that community members were submitting to the Mount Vernon sewage system or the Mount Vernon department essentially ignored them and let it be and did nothing to solve the problem until Save the Sound got involved and became very active in emphasizing it as an issue of climate resilience and ecological equity. Thank you. All right, perfect. Yeah, so other forms of environmental justice work that Save the Sound is doing in New York City, it much started back at the inception of environmental racism's, recognition in New York as the most polluted city in the country. This came after the 1966 New York City smog disaster, which killed 168 residents, and this was caused by a stagnant mass of air that covered the city, trapping pollutants overhead. Uprose is an organization that was founded in response to this incident and the needs of people in the Sunset Park community in Brooklyn, but has since grown to be a leader in public health and climate justice work. We Act 2 is a very popular organization that was founded in 1988 by Vernice Miller Travis and Peggy Shepard and Chuck Sutton, who organized in response to the new sewage treatment plants in their community. Peggy Shepard is very active to this day, and you can often see her at national level work for environmental justice across America. Next slide. So a recent study that has uncovered how much of New York is in fact facing environmental racism has found that 35% of New York can be considered a disadvantaged community. New York City having, I mean, well over a third of them, nearly half. Um, the way that this is kind of tracked is using various indicators to identify various sources of risk and environmental burden, such include, environmental burdens of climate change risk, land use and potential climate change risk, potential pollution exposure, and comparing that against the population characteristics and the demographics based on race, income, ethnicity, and the resultant health outcome. So this really serves as an environmental justice tool that allows people who want to do this work to really quantify the impact. Connecticut has a very similar type of tool, or they use an environmental justice map that gives people access to the same type of information. It's hosted out of CIRCA, or the Connecticut Institute on Resilience and Climate Adaptation. Both are having this information. It can be considered bleak because you might be like, I don't want to know this, but is really actually essential for communities and organizations like Save the Sound or smaller organizations to be able to quantify the impact of the work that they want to do and thus facilitate their access to federal funding to, start working towards solutions. Next slide, please. So similar to disadvantaged communities in New York, Connecticut defines environmental justice communities as distressed communities, distress being related to the census block, where at least 30% of the population is living below 200% of the federal poverty line. So in terms of where we're ranked as distressed municipalities, Hartford, where Muir is housed, is ranked 6th on the state Department of Economic and Community Development's distressed municipalities, whereas Bridgeport, which this photo is cited in, was rated 16th. Thank you. And seeing in red, it's illustrated the different cities in Connecticut, or not necessarily cities, but towns as well, that would be considered environmental justice communities. Does anyone see their hometown on the map? Can I get a little engagement?
I see my neighborhood, where I grew up in West Hartford, is considered an EJ census block. Grew up nearby New Britain Avenue, bordering the South End. And it really wasn't something that occurred to me back then, what an environmental justice community and what environmental injustices were. I really only saw economic inequality from one end of my hometown to another.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
would agree.
see a couple of distressed communities and environmental justice communities in my town.
Yeah, mine is highlighted where I went to high school, Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is really how I started getting involved in this work. Yeah, very dark red. I grew up in Norwalk, but it doesn't seem, I'm reading from the chat. I grew up in Norwalk, but it doesn't seem to be listed as significant for environmental justice. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering what the areas are that don't seem to be related to urban areas. Do you all know those? Is that like the Housatonic River? Is that?
Alex, you want to take that one? Oh, okay. But for context, there are different ways that people, so the distressed community aspect of it, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of more so what's being highlighted here, and that's mapped onto environmental justice because of the way that economic and environmental burdens tend to be correlated. But a lot of this is kind of more specifically related to the distress levels, which is more financial and their proximity to the federal poverty line.
I could give you an eye loop. You want an eye loop?
Did you have a question, Robert? Or comment? Okay, never mind. All right, let's keep it going. So what about New York and Long Island? Highlighted in blue are some of the areas that would be considered a distressed community. As you can see, a large swath of that area is in fact New York State, as referenced before. Do we have any New York people here? Are we all Connecticut girls? Connecticut girls. All right, y'all are quiet, that's fine. So next slide.
I was unmuted. I mean,
Oh, go ahead.
I'm from Oyster Bay.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I consider myself a tri-state girl because I was born in New Jersey. So I consider New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York my home.
Mhm.
So what is an affecting facility, right? So affecting facilities are really, when you think of like sources of pollution, Connecticut will call them an affecting facility. So this can include an electric generating facility with the capacity of more than 10 megawatts, a sludge or solid waste incinerator or combustor, a sewage treatment plant with the capacity for more than 50 million gallons per day, intermediate processing center, like a multi-town recycling factory or facility rather, with a monthly volume of over 25 tons of material, new or expanding landfills, including those that contain ash, construction or demolition debris, medical waste incinerators, and other major sources of air pollution as defined by the Federal Clean Air Act. So at the top, you can see the infamous candy cane, and it is in fact one of the most famous and most affecting facilities in Bridgeport, Connecticut, located right on the Long Island Sound, in the South End. In the next slide, we'll see a map. Yeah. Do you notice that there's a lot of overlap between this map and the one that we saw before? Does that help kind of conceptualize the link between economic disparities and the location of such facilities? Right, so here it's color coded and you can see what type of facility is there, right? So if you're seeing a blue dot, it's a place that is suffering from air pollution. If you see a green, like a dark green, that is a waste-based facility. A brighter green is water, which you kind of can't see if they're kind of hidden more towards New Haven. Air pollution is purple, and air and waste is purple, and air and water is a yellow. Well, waste. Next slide. So what about New York? On the left-hand side, we can see kind of a sense of climate vulnerability. So this is kind of looking at the impact of hurricane strength. So if you're seeing an area in red, that means that that area can be significantly flooded or at risk when you have something kind of as minimally intense as a Category 1 hurricane, right? So like the lowest level of a hurricane can cause like a very high level of damage in the areas that are colored red, and it gets lighter based on what level of hurricane it takes, right? So areas that you see in kind of a really light yellow, that means it will take a Category 4 hurricane to cause significant damage. Overlapping this, however, are the little icons that are illustrating what type of storage sites are there, or what type of facilities are there, and the the waste or the contents of that area. So it might be a Superfund site, or it might be a chemical storage site, or different types of toxic release sites. And the overlapping of these two things, right? Like the storm surge vulnerability with the level of toxicity or risk associated with these types of sites is another issue in terms of climate resilience and environmental justice. On the right-hand side, the purple dots are kind of another way that you can perceive the map on the left. So these are based on the number of chemically intensive facilities, or essentially affecting facilities in that area. So where you see a huge purple dot by Jackson Heights and Queens, that means there are over 200 affecting facilities that might be small, but they do in fact have chemical intensive materials on the area that are affecting the community members there. Next slide, please. And of course, at the heart of it all are the health inequities that result from this exposure to various carcinogens, which very commonly people know that these types of air pollution sources are associated with increased rates of asthma, as well as increased rates of, asthma attacks and death from asthma. In Connecticut alone, Black and Latinx youth are about 4 and 5 times more likely to be hospitalized and die from asthma attacks than white youths in Connecticut. And it is essentially a function of the disparate impact of pollution sources. As we learned with Cancer Alley in New Orleans, we have increased rates of cancer based on the sources of, or based on exposure to pollution. And more recently, research is uncovering kind of the mental health aspects of this. So on top of eco-anxiety, which is a slightly different, phenomenon, exposure to this pollution is now being associated with increased rates of ADHD and dementia later in age, or earlier onset dementia happening sooner than we need it to. So yeah, I definitely do a lot of work on this and environmental justice and the interactions between human, animal, and plant health. So if you want to learn more about that, I'm your girl. But for now, I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, Kat.
Mhm.
We're going to transition over to more discussion on the cumulative impacts of the types of polluting facilities that Kat referenced in the previous slide. Because when you have an abundance of these types of facilities in your neighborhood, or within a 3-mile, 5-mile radius, you name it, you are likely to be vulnerable to many of the diseases referenced in the previous slide because of the harmful gases emitted by such polluting facilities. There are air affecting facilities, waste affecting facilities, and water affecting facilities. And if they are not regulated to high standards, then they pose serious risks to public health. Connecticut acted to pass a environmental justice law in the legislature in 2009, requiring basic public participation in decisions to site or expand certain facilities, because up until then, companies were not required to engage the public in decisions that impact your health and your environment. In 2020, upgrades to this rule took effect, requiring more intense communication with the public and providing of services or funding that would mitigate any environmental effects. Speaking more specifically to what is a community environmental benefit agreement in Connecticut as a result of the 2020 rule. Any environmental justice community with 5 or more affecting facilities, the owner of an affecting facility needs to negotiate a community environmental benefit agreement with the chief municipal officer or mayor, first select person, on what will they be paying the town in exchange for the siting or expansion of that facility. Will they give $200,000 to a garden club? Will they give $500,000 to the Girl Scouts? The opportunities are important because these community environmental benefit agreements should result in lower polluting hazards, improved education on the types of on the types of hazards impacting the given municipality. The effort to strengthen that rule has been revisited, and we'll elaborate more in a secondary slide. But just know that Connecticut is acting to bring more people to the decision-making processes. In 2022, Governor Ned Lamont enacted an executive order forming a Connecticut Equity and Environmental Justice Advisory Council to advise the Commissioner of the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection on historic environmental injustices and potential solutions. I am one of 3 environmental organizational representatives on that council. There are 5 members of state-identified environmental justice communities on that council, as well as 2 business representatives and representatives from other state agencies. And I share this with you to give you an example of how Connecticut, has increased procedural equity through laws such as 2009's EJ law, 2020's EJ law, and now this executive order. This type of leadership is important because a lot of people are excluded from governmental decision-making processes. To go more into that, New Jersey passed a cumulative impacts law similar to Connecticut's law. They use Connecticut's law as an inspiration for this rule passed in 2020. They require that the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection evaluate environmental and public health impacts. New Jersey is the first state to require mandatory permit denials. If there's an analysis, if the governmental analyses determine a new facility will have a disproportionate negative impact on overburdened communities. In New York, Governor Hochul signed legislation to strengthen protections for communities that are already bearing disproportionate polluting burdens by passing a similar law. There's more detail on this in another slide. And now Connecticut has also passed a similar rule in 2023. And the main piece of this legislation that I'll share with you is intended to grant DEEP and the Connecticut Siting Council the tools and authority to deny or place conditions on permits if the state determines that the permit would place additional burdens on already overburdened communities. This is important because large-scale polluting enterprises should not be given the green light to pollute willy-nilly. We are in the 21st century in a time where solar and wind are on the rise, and these are the types of technologies we should be investing in. The types of affecting facilities mentioned earlier in the presentation, there is a place for some of them. They all can't be shut down overnight. We have utilities that service communities in a meaningful way. However, they should be mitigating their environmental impact to the highest degree possible. And so that's why this EJ law is so important. There are regulations being developed in Connecticut to really make rules or directives of general applicability. What's taking place right now is listening sessions in Connecticut. There's one coming up next month on identification, measurement of environmental and health stressors. And in New York, to the right, New York is aiming to codify the cumulative impacts law that I mentioned in the previous slide. They are amending the State Environmental Quality Review Act regulations to implement provisions of the environmental justice citing law. And the public right now is invited to submit written comments on the proposed rulemaking through May 7th. And so for the Connecticut based folks on this call, please take a look at the left on the upcoming public and industry stakeholder engagement workshops. You can go to DEEP's website and in the environmental justice section to find the registration link to participate in some of the upcoming workshops. And for our friends in New York on the right, highly encourage you to submit written comment to help New York codify their EJ law, because in a time of federal environmental rollbacks, we should be strengthening environmental protections, and states are our own last resort right now. And I'll turn it over to Kat.
Yeah, so thank you, Alex, because it really is super important to get involved, because really half the battle is showing up, right? Like, people who want to get away with things are counting on you not knowing that it's happening until it's too late. So try to just share your opinion, even if it's like a 2-sentence testimony. It all adds up, like it all counts. It really doesn't matter. However, there are so many other ways that we can advance environmental justice in the region, at your own like individual level, up to the community and state level. So that can include reducing costs for energy and housing. This is kind of speaking at different levels, right? So might be people who are working at these energy providers, or the various industries, but also people who can do their own work to solve these problems based on their own consumption. So reducing your costs for energy and housing, updating sewer systems to ensure that we have clean water infrastructure funding, but also, again, making sure that our sewage systems are resilient, because the more we have natural disasters that increase flooding, the more we have risks for overflows and the negative impacts to the ecosystem and human health as well. The removal of toxins from everyday consumer products, textiles, and foods, as well as just a reduction in your own consumption of consumer products that will have such toxins, or that might be overproduced in general, like clothing or plastic. Defending your community from rollbacks to key environmental laws. Again, staying on track with the different types of bills and legislation that are up and being considered in this session until June. Promoting nature-based solutions, that's my jazz. I love them, right? So engaging in ways that we can learn from the natural way of things, right? So like the way that nature has done it in the past prior to human intervention, and taking the hint in terms of how to solve things. So that might look like building up your shorelines using coral reef balls, or filling it with a lot more oysters and fixing that aspect of the ecosystem as opposed to just putting up a seawall and making sure that we're, you know, adding more gray infrastructure that can be destroyed as well. So nature-based solutions like bioswales, planting trees, etc. That's my jam. But people who are doing that need your support, right? So supporting local environmental and climate justice organizations, startups, and the different types of projects that you hear about that people like to pitch, or, you know, they have a vision, but they don't really know how to actualize it. Use your expertise to support them. But again, defend public funding for environmental justice work, because that is the only way things get done. On a separate note, I think we should bring back bartering. So if people can't afford to pay you, trade them for help on your own projects, right? Like, you know, mutual aid and community support is what we need, especially as we are becoming more reliant on state government and community level efforts. Next slide, last but not least. And then we'll go to our Q&A. Next steps. If you are feeling drawn to act, you can email Alex to get involved with the Strengthening Connecticut's Environmental Law Committee meetings. You can participate in DEEP's EJ Law regulation development, as was just mentioned. Very important, happening right now. So this is like a really important window of opportunity. You can email your comments in support of New York's cumulative impact law regulations. And you can book me for any types of projects that you need help with, or consulting or different types of project management or, you know, event production. You can email me. Everything is listed here, and we can put the emails and contacts in the chat for easier access. Now we're going to open the floor to a Q&A. So let me see those faces. Turn your cameras on. Come on. You could eat dinner too, I don't mind.
Any questions from our audience? What is that? How is everybody like feeling from this presentation? Robert, I see that you dropped in the chat some of your eelgrass work.
Yes, I did. I think it's important to let everyone know that with or without funding, I'm going to continue to do restoration work in New York City if I can, and in Long Island Sound and all the estuaries around Long Island, like I've been doing. So, and it takes community effort. It's a lot of volunteer work, and educationally, it's a lot of. You know, I did a lot of workshops with a lot of students in Connecticut and New York.
Nice.
Do these projects, so you know, it's good outreach. It's you know, everything's falling apart. We could do this work to bring back a little bit of what's been lost through a lot of volunteer effort.
Thank you, Robert. Your work on habitat restoration is so meaningful and so vital to protecting endangered species. And thank you. I see Elizabeth on camera. Elizabeth, any questions? Any impressions?
To me, Elizabeth?
Oh yes, you.
Yeah. Yeah, I taught many a Zoom class over time and know that having a face there is actually kind of helpful. But I just thank you for the great work that y'all are doing. Is there a list of organizations in different areas? I'm working in Waterbury, the greater Waterbury area. So is there a list available for those organizations that are doing work?
You know, we do have some partners on our Keeney Town dam removal project that I can send your way. There is a community group called the Radical Advocates for Cross-Cultural Education, a race, RACCE, in Waterbury. They've supported many environmental initiatives, specifically fare-free transit, um, which is important. And yeah, and we can share more names with you, Elizabeth.
That would be great. Thank you. I'm writing them down, so.
Are you
Sure.
looking only for folks in Waterbury or throughout the whole state?
I'm sorry, what?
Would you prefer folks in Waterbury or throughout the whole
Well,
state?
I mean, the whole area obviously is very important, but I was thinking specifically in the greater Waterbury area.
Yeah.
But it's a small state, let's face it. There's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Well, thank
Um,
you.
Sure,
Alex
thank
can
you.
definitely send you a more fulfilling list. And I'll think about who I know in that area because I do tend to work with people who are predominantly in Southern Connecticut.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure if you'd like the information.
Great. No, that would be fantastic. Thank you. And I actually have to run. So thank you all. And good luck.
No, drop your email in the chat or so we make sure to message you.
Okay. Okay, I will. Thanks.
I see a question in the chat from PC Partners. It says, we're going to start working on collecting heat data with heat monitors. Are there other local grassroots groups who are doing this in the Bridgeport area? Collecting heat data specifically, there aren't any that come to mind that are like actively engaging this work. I think the organizations that would be most keen on collaborating might be like Groundworks Bridgeport, Trust for Public Land, and let's see, I honestly Save the Sound. Like, but also myself and the work that I like to do. But it's, yeah, there isn't anyone that I know who are doing this actively right now. But I think it's really commendable and necessary, especially when it comes to, you know, wanting to start creating solution-oriented projects as opposed to just like awareness raising.
Yeah, I can say that our water monitoring work is region-wide. I don't know if we've specifically monitored for heat as of yet, but I can check in with my colleagues at the water quality department to see if they have any recommendations for you, Vanessa.
Yeah. And not in Bridgeport, but would probably also clap would be race, as Alex mentioned before. Any other questions?
And Jeff, I want to thank you for joining the presentation. I noted that you are one of the Keeneytown liaisons with Save the Sound, and thank you for your work. First time meeting you.
Yeah, likewise, my pleasure. I know I've seen your name quite a bit in the last 10 months or so that I've been on the team. So nice to finally meet.
Pleasure. Any other impressions, questions?
Alex is a mover and shaker, a great context to have.
And as is Kat. We worked with Kat in organizing a climate mic open night, climate open mic night a couple of years ago, and we had a great time. We built community. People came together and sang and rhymed and really spoke what was on their mind regarding the climate crisis, and it was beautiful. And we need more events like that, combining the arts and activism. So,
Yeah, I am driven by pleasure activism. We need more of that in this work. Otherwise, we're all going to burn out and, you know, be super depressed. And so, yeah, building community, facilitating catharsis, and maintaining mental health is very important. Thank you for coming, Robert. I wish you all the best with your work.
there are no other questions this evening, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for joining the Radical Love webinar. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email, drop my email in the chat. And stay in contact because this radical love advocacy needs more community in collaboration with one another. And so I thank you for your time tonight. Everybody have a good evening. If you didn't finish your dinner already, finish your dinner. Can't advocate on an empty stomach.